I can briefly show on my chart how I was able to make this call very simply by following a key trend line. So let's take a look here. And if we look at Bitcoin, I'm actually still very bullish on Bitcoin longer term. And so the key here is it's more of a momentum trade, right? You came into the year, Trump was coming into the White House. There was so much excitement and it drove Bitcoin up for quite a good portion. And then it kind of stalled out. S&P continues to stay very, very strong. However, take a look at this chart. If we bring up this chart here on the S&P 500, it is a remarkable one. All right, so on the S&P chart, we have here, look at this.
While the mainstream media was calling for a $250,000 Bitcoin, Gareth relied on one simple multi-year trend line to call the exact top at $127,000. But the story doesn't end there. As we move into 2026, the landscape is shifting. We're seeing a massive rotation of capital out of crypto and into silver and equities, alongside a fundamental change in how institutions trade Bitcoin through ETFs. In this breakdown, we'll look at why Gareth sees a significant pullback coming in the first half of 2026, the specific price targets he's watching for a generational bottom, and why the second half of the year could spark a massive recovery fueled by a decaying trust in the global financial system. Let's get into the charts. Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space, and drop your comments and observations in the comment section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks, and enjoy the video.
Bitcoin topping out at around 127,000. It was a great run in Bitcoin. There were lots of calls for 250,000 by year end, but the chart just did not give us that indicator, right? It was telling us that it was at the top. And in fact, I can briefly show on my chart how I was able to make this call very simply by following a key trend line. So let's take a look here. And if we look at Bitcoin and we go to our monthly chart, what we can see here is that in December 2017, we had our peak, our bull market peak. And then here you have your first high in 2021. And all you're doing here is connecting a trend line between those 2 points. And notice no other time does Bitcoin tag that line until we got to October and September of this year. And we had a 1 hit, 2 hits, and 3 hits. And then Bitcoin came down. And really, the key to technical analysis is not overthinking it, right? There doesn't need to be a lot of indicators here. You just simply have a trend line that has told you price could not get through any time in the past, really 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And therefore, we have to assume it's going to stop price here. And so simply put, that was one of the calls that I made this year, and it was a good one. We've seen Bitcoin really pull back substantially. Look at this and just keep in mind, even though I called Bitcoin's pullback this year, I'm actually still very bullish on Bitcoin longer term. And so the key here is it's more of a momentum trade, right? You came into the year, Trump was coming into the White House. There was so much excitement and it drove Bitcoin up for quite a good portion. And then it kind of stalled out. We haven't seen a lot of the new initiatives come through. We still can't, again, trade Bitcoin in the US or at least buy other coins through some of the other players out there, the exchanges here in the US. You have to have your know your customer type rules going on. And so again, for me, this is a lot of just of a stall out where there's not been the key initial or continued catalyst for Bitcoin. And I ultimately think that there's also a rotation of capital here. We've seen silver. I bet silver has taken a large percentage of money from retail investors that were in Bitcoin, that were in altcoins, and they've rushed into silver for the momentum trade. Same thing for the stock market. The stock market has been the hot trade. And so ultimately, I still think Bitcoin, after a pullback, maybe a little bit lower, is going to make a bigger move up. And I'd love to show you guys something because, you know, most key players out there will say, oh, well, every Bitcoin bear market, and by the way, it is the 4-year cycle if you believe in it, is going to correct by 70, 75%. I don't think that's going to happen this time. And I'm going to show you why here. So if we look at this same chart, look at what we have. Here's your December 2017 high. When we corrected in the bear market in 2021 into 2022, we only came down to the previous cycle high, right? And so if we follow that same methodology and we look at the highs from 2021, you're really only looking for a pullback for this cycle that's going to take you down towards around 70,000 or maybe just below. And at that point, you're only down about 45% on Bitcoin. And we honestly could be there very, very soon if we see another leg lower. And so ultimately, for the bulls out there in Bitcoin, I think, again, we're actually closer to the bottom than where people actually would think. And I think you're going to start to see money rotating from the stock market and from some of the metals plays here back into Bitcoin sooner than later. So the wider it's owned, and especially the more institutionally owned, the lower the drawdowns are and the lower the big bull markets will be. Meaning that, again, you're not going to get your 1,000 type moves in a bull market because, again, the law of large numbers, the institutional base is going to keep it from going too far to the downside. But I think going back to what you mentioned on ETFs, that was such a great thing for Bitcoin, but it also was why it's probably underperforming now. There was so much hype over the last couple years that everyone rushed in. And because now people are buying it in their stock portfolios, many people are saying, wait a minute, why am I holding Bitcoin that is underperforming? I need to dump this and go into stocks. And so it's now competing more, right? If you go back a few cycles ago, Bitcoin really wasn't competing with anything else, maybe gold to a small percentage, but overall it was on its own. Because of the ETFs, now people owning it in their stock portfolios, now people are actually actively dumping the ETF because they want to take that money and put it in a better performing asset like gold, like silver, like stocks.
So, but yet you're still bullish on Bitcoin long term. What's your Bitcoin outlook for 2026?
Yeah, and so I actually think in the first half of 2026, we're going to see a move down on the charts back to this kind of 69,000 level. And then once we get to that 69,000, maybe a little bit lower, I think you're going to start to see the next bull run come in. And again, people shouldn't be expecting this right to 250 type thousand. It's now going to compete with some of these other $1 trillion assets, including Apple, including silver, and some of these other ones. But ultimately, I do think next year, by late next year, you're probably near 150,000. So again, it will have some significant upside here. Again, especially if you're patient and wait for that next leg down to buy.
We are currently witnessing a momentum trade rotation. Soloway points out that retail capital, the fair weather friends of crypto, has fled Bitcoin to chase the parabolic move in silver. This shiny object syndrome is a classic market cycle behavior. However, this creates a contrarian opportunity. If silver pulls back in the coming weeks, we may see a short-term bounce in Bitcoin as that speculative money rotates back.
My guess is what we're going to see is more concerns about interest rates being dropped and being forced down, even in light of strong GDP. We know we got the GDP reading of 4.3%. These are things that are going to make people very nervous about the financial system. And we've already seen it, right? I mean, de-dollarization is slowly occurring with other countries now not wanting the US to have as much control over them. So they're starting to sell off dollars, not as willing to buy US debt as the debt soars here in the US. And I think, again, we just heard just in the last 24 hours that government spending is even higher now, even though Doge came in early in the year and cut some spending. It's now ballooned back to the upside. And that, again, is going to be one of the key catalysts here, is the inability for Americans and global participants of the financial system to actually trust the fiat currencies. And that is going to continue to drive the want for holding Bitcoin.
Yeah, the fiscal dominance. And that was part of the debasement trade that we had earlier this year. And the big banks like JP Morgan, they did have Bitcoin as part of that debasement trade. They were like gold, absolutely. But a lot of them also had Bitcoin as a counter to this debasement and devaluation of the dollar and of fiat currencies at large. I want to get back to that, but I just want to go back into a point that you said. You said that a lot of people were opting out of Bitcoin and going for silver. Now, traditionally, it's been Bitcoin versus gold. So explain why that trade happened. Was it more of a let's jump on what could be the hottest trade sort of idea? Was this more of a retail day trader sort of mentality? What was that, the thinking there?
You're 100% right on that. And so you have the hardcore Bitcoin believers, the Michael Saylors of the world, and a lot of retail investors that really believe in Bitcoin. And then it also attracts the get rich quick people, right? And the get rich quick people are going to be always fair weather friends. They're going to be loving Bitcoin when it's surging to the upside. And then as soon as Bitcoin underperforms and there's a shinier play out there, a la silver, they're going to take that money out and run into silver. And so the idea here is you could actually see in the next few weeks potentially a bounce in Bitcoin if silver does pull back. And I think that's kind of a short-term trade, but something that investors may want to pay attention to in the near term for Bitcoin. I came into 2025 thinking that by the end of the year, we would see a recession, or at least be on the verge of recession. Per the latest GDP number, that certainly isn't the case. Granted, I'm a believer that about 90% of that GDP is the AI CapEx right now. So I do think that most Americans out there feel like they're struggling with inflation, with the economy slowing down, with the labor market slowing down. But a la the numbers, we are definitely not in a recession. And the S&P continues to stay very, very strong. However, take a look at this chart. If we bring up this chart here on the S&P 500, it is a remarkable one. All right. So on the S&P chart, we have here, look at this. We're in a parallel, which is, again, a way of tracking market action where, again, it caps the highs, but also gives you bottoms. And if we go back to the COVID low in 2020, that's where this bottom trend line starts. And look at how it connects perfectly through the bear market lows here in 2022. And then when we sold off for the liberation tariffs, we actually came right down to that trend line. And that was where the catapult took place to the upside. Now, if you look here and we extend this parallel up to the bull market of 2021, where do we see the S&P? We just pierced it back in October. We got a sell-off. Now we're coming back up to do a double tap. I still think in the first half of 2026, we are going to see some sort of rejection here. And you could see every time we were at the bottom of this parallel, we had major moves to the upside, right? And then every time, again, there it is. And when we were at the highs, we had a big sell-off to the downside. And so just following technical analysis, this chart definitely tells us be very wary in the first half of 2026. We could be due for a major downside move in the S&P 500.
The charts are signaling a reset before the next leg up. If you can stomach a drop to $69,000 in the coming months, the long-term reward at $150,000 remains firmly on the table. But remember, the game has changed. Bitcoin is now competing with trillion-dollar giants like Apple and gold for every dollar of capital. Patience is the ultimate edge. If you found this technical breakdown helpful, hit the like button and subscribe for more institutional-grade analysis. What do you think? Is $69,000 the bottom, or are we going lower? Let me know in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one. Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space, and drop your comments and observations in the comment section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks, and enjoy the video.